Veteran on the Move, episode number 1. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. This is the historical episode number 1 for Veteran on the Move, your Pathfinder to Freedom. I'm your host, Joe Crane, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about my background. I graduated from the University of Kansas and received a commission in the Marine Corps, went into the Marine Corps as a second lieutenant, had an air contract, and went through the basic school in Quantico, spent quite a bit of time there. Went through flight school, ended up out on the West Coast flying AH-1W Super Cobra attack helicopters. I did 2 Westpac deployments to Okinawa, Japan, and South Korea. And after 8 years, I got out. That was back in 98. And transitioned over the reserves, kept flying in the reserves in Atlanta, Georgia, and got hired at the airlines, a regional airline called Atlantic Southeast Airlines, flying the mighty EMB-120 Brasilia. I did that for 3 years and managed to get hired at Delta Airlines after that. And then at that point, it was June of 2001. So shortly after I finished training with my job at Delta Airlines, September 11th came along and that all came crashing down. So I ended up, long story short, going back on active duty with the Marine Corps. I got back into flying. I was still flying the AH-1 at the time, and did a couple ground jobs here and there, but ended up doing 2 combat flying deployments with 2 different squadrons over in Iraq, still flying the AH-1. And my last 3 years in the Marine Corps ended up back in Kansas. I was on the staff at the U.S. Army Command General Staff College up in Fort Leavenworth, and just retired at the end of last year. I transitioned back over to my job at Delta Airlines in the last several months. And my last couple of years, while I was on the staff up there at Fort Leavenworth, I decided I wanted to finally go get that master's degree that I never did because I was deploying too much and just too much ops tempo and things were too busy, and partly from being too lazy also. And so I started looking into what kind of degree programs were available out there. And I knew I was going to go back to my Delta Airlines job. So the most logical choice would have been the MBA. But I really didn't want to get the MBA because I knew that there were some things with it that didn't interest me all that much. And I knew the only reason I'd be getting an MBA was so I could pad my resume in order to get hired in some corporate job and end up in a cube farm trying to climb my way into the corner office. And I knew I was going back to Delta, so I knew I didn't really have to bother with that. So I wanted to get a degree in something that interested me, and I started looking around, and I discovered you can get a degree in entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship has been my passion even since I was a little kid. Back when I was a little kid, they called it wanting to be an inventor. Nowadays, the buzzword is entrepreneur. So I entered into the master's program for entrepreneurship at Oklahoma State. It was a great program. I learned a lot of incredible things. And in the course of getting my master's, I started up a nonprofit called Speaking of Heroes. And Speaking of Heroes is essentially a speakers bureau for our wounded warriors that gives them a chance to tell their story. And I'm still in the process of making Speaking of Heroes happen. It does exist. I entered a business plan competition down at Oklahoma State. Never written a business plan before. And I went down there and competed. And of course, I was in over my head, and there was people that were way out of my league competing against me. But somehow they liked the idea. They liked the passion behind the idea. And I ended up coming in 3rd place and won $5,000 to apply towards getting Speaking of Heroes off the ground. So ultimately, it was a great experience. And it's hard to believe out of 92 teams, I ended up coming in 3rd. Really satisfying and proud moment to be able to pull that off. Because frankly, in the beginning, I really had no idea what I was doing. So I've got the nonprofit going, but I also wanted to do some other type of entrepreneurial venture because being an airline pilot, I do get some chunks of time off and I'm able to control my schedule. And I still have this entrepreneurial passion. And I've played around with a lot of different kinds of businesses over the years in my Marine Corps days. A lot of things that required, to get a lot of momentum going, and then a deployment would come up and things would come to a screeching halt and I wouldn't be able to resurrect it again. And so that's really been my passion. I spent a lot of my time when even my early days in the military, I found myself more fascinated with Entrepreneur magazine and other business magazines, and then the internet started coming along, and all the different ways to have online businesses and create other streams of income with online businesses really captured my attention. I've spent a lot of years doing a lot of research and playing around with a lot of things on that, but I never really could make anything work very well to actually make very much money at it, because being fully employed and like I said, the deployments and flying and being gone a lot, it just really wasn't very conducive to ever getting anything started. So now that I'm retired, I've transitioned back into the civilian world now. I'm working on my nonprofit, Speaking of Heroes, and I'm also starting a podcast called Veteran on the Move. And Veteran on the Move is a podcast that came out of the idea of things I experienced in my transition. I've actually transitioned out of the military twice now, once back in 98 and once just the end of last year. And what I've learned in transitioning, especially this second time, trying to get into entrepreneurship, trying to get a couple businesses up and running, I learned a lot. I learned that there's a lot of people out there that can help you. I learned that there is a lot to learn and a lot that most military guys don't know. But there's also a lot of programs and resources out there, many of them free, that veterans can get involved in. And for example, when I was going through the Army ACAP classes up at Fort Leavenworth, I discovered there was a entrepreneur track and after the initial classes that you had to go through. And so I went through that, and here I am in a room surrounded by other entrepreneurs. Some of them were spouses, some of them were Army guys, there was another Marine in there, and there was a couple of Air Force and I believe even a Navy guy in this entrepreneur workshop with me. And one of the little things I discovered was a program called 1 Million Cups. And it's founded by the Kauffman Foundation, which happens to be here in Kansas City. But 1 Million Cups is going nationwide and also around the world. And it's once a week meeting with other entrepreneurs, and a couple of aspiring entrepreneurs get up in front of the room and pitch their story and pitch their business to the other entrepreneurs as a way of exposure. And also to get help from everybody else in the room. I like to say it's really kind of the modern day Rotary Club. And 1 Million Cups is expanding around, not only around the country, but around the nation. So if there's not a 1 Million Cups location near you, they are looking for people to start those up. So I've been going to 1 Million Cups. It's been very inspiring to me to be surrounded by other entrepreneurs and hearing the ideas and having the great ideas flow. It's been an awesome experience. So I wanted to start Veteran on the Move as a way to introduce veterans to entrepreneurship and expose them to successful veterans that have become entrepreneurs, other business leaders, other programs and resources that are out there that are all available to all these veterans that a lot of guys may not get exposed to. So the other thing is time management. Like I said, I did retire from the Marine Corps at the end of this last year, so I'm obviously a little older. My wife and I have 4 kids, 2 dogs, a house, cars, kids' activities. There's a lot of stuff going on. So there isn't a whole lot of excess time in my life to pursue my entrepreneurial ventures, which is also one of the things that I want to cover in the podcast: time management skills and strategies to maximize your time, and how to deal with being an entrepreneur in the midst of a busy lifestyle. So that's my story in a nutshell, and the background on the podcast, Veteran on the Move. If you like the podcast, be sure to go into iTunes and leave a review. So until the next episode, I am Oscar Mike.